Welcome back, students. I'm hoping you're figuring out your schoolwork very easily. I know the last week was pretty hard for everyone, but I hope it's coming along. I hope you're looking forward to the shorter school week, and we are going to get on with ecology. So, like I was saying, this week we are going to be working on ecology. So, things like relationships between different parts of the environment, how one affects the other, what are the different parts, and what is a food chain and a food web. So, without further ado, I am going to get started on your notes for this week. Okay, so to begin on the notes for ecology, we want to start with looking at the 5 different levels of how the environment is organized. So, the smallest unit of the environment is the organism, then it's the population, so how many of those organisms are there. Then it's the community, so different organisms in a community and how they work together. Then it's the ecosystem, then it's the biosphere. So it gradually gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, so let's start small and work big here. So let's start with organism. An organism is an individual living thing that is made of cells, uses energy, reproduces, responds, grows, and develops. So it's like the individual one thing, the organism. There are many, many organisms in the community and in the ecosystem. Next step up as we get bigger here is populations. And populations is just a group of individuals of the same species that live together. So, for example, we have populations of humans in different towns, right? So, Pierce has a certain population of humans living there. Similarly, in different environments, there's populations of ants or populations of hawks, things like that. It's the number of individuals of the same species that live together. You know, if we zoom out even a little bit more, we get bigger here, we have communities. And this is all of the populations of species that live and interact in an area. So you might have a bunch of different species in a certain area, like you could look at a marsh or you could look at a forest. All of the different populations of species that live and interact in an area, that's your community. So it's everything put together. So for instance, in Pierce, you'd look at all of the people, all of the dogs, all of the cats, all of the raccoons, everything in the area together, that would be the community. Communities are only living things, so it's not the abiotic stuff like rocks, but it's the living things. Now, if we zoom out even a little bit more, we have ecosystems. This is the community, so in a given space, you have all of the different organisms that are living, all those populations and individual organisms. It's the community, and if you add the abiotic environment, that is the ecosystem. So it's all of the populations and living things, plus maybe the type of rock that they're on, or the different not living parts as well. The abiotic environment plus the community is the ecosystem. Finally, we zoom all the way out, and we have the biosphere. And this is the part of Earth where life exists. So any part on Earth where life exists, this is the biosphere. Okay, so this is the part where things live. So like the surface of the Earth, a little bit deeper than that, right? Because we have living things living in the ground, like bugs and worms and moles, whatever, as well as into the sky where the birds fly and things. This is the biosphere. So anywhere on Earth where life exists, that's the biosphere. So if we look at this picture here, it goes very big out. You're looking at the Earth. This is the biosphere. You zoom in a little bit, you're looking at all of a huge area, and in that area you might have a bunch of different populations, definitely a community, plus abiotic factors. That's an ecosystem. You zoom in, you're looking at all the living populations. That's the community, so all the different species together, that would be the community. You zoom in, you're looking at a population of alligators, right? You have 4 there in the picture, that would be a population. And you zoom in to one individual organism, you're going from very big at the biosphere all the way down to organism. And that's how we classify different parts of ecology. We're trying to determine what level of organization of this picture we want to look at just Simba himself. So one Simba is one individual organism. Organism would be the level of organization, because there's just one, right? It's Simba, one living organism. If you're wanting to determine what level of organization is here at Pride Rock, you want to look at all the different populations of animals, right? I see zebras, gazelles, lions, elephants, giraffes. So it's all the different populations together in an area. That would be the community, right? All the living things. Now, here we see Simba and his mom. That's two organisms, so that'd be like a number of organisms, a number of a species. That would be population. We can also look at all living things and categorize them in the way that they get energy. And we know all living things need energy, and there's three different ways that things get energy. Either they're a producer, so meaning they get energy from the sun. This would be like your plants, right? Like trees and grass and bushes all get their energy from the sun. Consumers eat the producers, or they eat other consumers, right? They're consuming, right? You're a consumer. You go to the store and you grab other things and you consume them. Consumers don't get their energy from the sun. They get it by eating other things. And finally, we have decomposers, and you probably guess what they do. They decompose things. So they feed off of already dead things. Okay, so when like that squirrel that died in the street, it decomposes because of all of these bugs and microorganisms. They eat dead things. Okay, so those are the three ways. Producer gets it from the sun, consumer eats other things to get their energy, and decomposers get their energy from dead things. We're going to look into each type one by one here. So let's start with producers. Producers are organisms that use sunlight directly to make food. So they use a process called photosynthesis. Photo means light, synthesis means to make, so they make energy from light. Some examples of producers are plants, algae, and some bacteria, right? So in the summer, you go out to the lake, lots of green film on the lake. Algae is making lots and lots of carbohydrates from sunlight and water and carbon dioxide. Consumers are pretty simple, right? The way they get energy is by eating other organisms, okay? So they can either be eating other producers, they can eat consumers, they could eat decomposers. They just get their energy by eating other organisms. Like humans are consumers because we eat other things, either vegetables, fruits, or meats, anything like that. We're eating other organisms to get our energy. We can break down consumers into even more types than just consumers, right? We have herbivores. Herbivores only consume plants like grasshoppers, prairie dogs, bison, deer, for example. They only eat other plants to get their energy. They're an herbivore. Carnivore only consumes meat, like a coyote or like a mountain lion. A mountain lion only eats meat to get their energy. They are a great example of a carnivore. Other examples are badgers and owls, wolves, things like that. You can even break it down into omnivores, right? Omnivores eat both plants and they eat meat. So there's many different types of consumers. Like I was saying, omnivores eat plants and animals. A grasshopper or a mouse will eat insects, lizards, grass, and seeds. Humans are omnivores, right? We eat vegetables and fruits and meat for a balanced diet. And another type is a scavenger. Scavengers only eat dead meat and plants, like a vulture, right? Vultures only, they circle around the sky waiting for finding dead things, and then that's what they eat to get their energy. Finally, we have decomposers, and decomposers are just organisms that get energy by breaking down dead organisms. Some examples of these are bacteria and fungi, right? So when things die, the bacteria in their gut starts to eat them away. This is breaking down dead organisms, and these are decomposing, right? So they decompose dead things, dead organisms. Okay, so let's go through some pictures here and see if we can tell what type of organism they are. So here we can see that we have a consumer, right? We have a bear. And we know that bears eat, let's say here we can see that it's in a river eating fish. that would be a carnivore. But we also know bears like to eat berries and things. So that's both plants and animals. We consider that an omnivore. Here we see a koala eating eucalyptus. It's eating plants. So that would mean it is you guessed it, it's an herbivore. In this picture here, we see a bunch of vultures eating a dead animal. What type is that? You got it right. It is a scavenger, right? Not a decomposer. It's a scavenger, right? Still a consumer. In the picture here, we have the man versus food guy. He's eating a sandwich with fries. So on the sandwich, you have meat. The bread's made out of plants. The fries are made out of plants. But you have meat on the sandwich. He's eating both. That means he's that's right, an omnivore. Okay, we have a great white shark. Great white sharks only eat other organisms, right? Like this poor seal. That would mean that the great white shark is you're right, carnivore. Finally, we have polar bears, and polar bears only eat living things. So that means that they only eat other organisms, which means that they are consumers, and also they only get their energy from meat. They're carnivores. In this picture, we can see that there's many different organisms getting their energy from different places. The plants are getting their energy from the sun. Prairie dog's getting their energy from the plants. The coyote's getting its energy from the prairie dog. It's all kind of going in a line there, if you can see that. As you go along here, that coyote might die or probably will die, and the vulture gets its energy from the coyote, and the vulture dies, and the decomposers get their energy from the vulture. So the energy goes from the plant all the way through the coyote, the vulture, and into the decomposers. This flow of energy, either a food chain or a food web, and there is a difference between the two. A food chain is a diagram that shows how energy in food flows from one organism to another. It's linear, right? It's a line, one to another. So the plant to the prairie dog to the coyote, that would be a food chain. A food web, on the other hand, is a diagram that shows the feeding relationships between organisms in an ecosystem. So instead of a straight line, this food web is what it sounds like, a web. All of these things are interconnected, right? So the frog might get its energy from plants and from bugs, but the bugs might get their energy from the plants, and like a turtle might get its energy by eating frogs and the bugs, right? So it's all sorts of different relationships in one, and the web shows that very well by connecting everything together. Here's a good example of a food chain, right? Sun and water goes to the producer grass that goes directly into the grasshopper that eats it. That energy from the grass into the grasshopper gets transferred to the snake when the snake eats the grasshopper, and then the hawk eats the snake. So that energy has gone from the sun into the grass, through the grasshopper, through the snake, into the hawk. Okay, so it's a straight line, it's a chain. This might look different in different biomes. And a different biome you can think of as just a different ecosystem. So, for example, in your yard, you might have grass that feeds a grasshopper that goes into a rat that eats the grasshopper, and then a snake eats the rat, and that's a food chain there. But in a lake, it might go from algae to a mosquito to a dragonfly that eats the mosquito, and then the fish eats the dragonfly. But maybe in the ocean, it goes from phytoplankton into zooplankton, and then the fish eats the zooplankton and the seal eats the fish, right? So a food chain isn't the same everywhere. You can make one for any different type of environment. Example of a food web, all of these different animals are interconnected with each other, right? The mountain lion eats the squirrel and the deer. The squirrel eats the nuts, the deer eats the grass, so on and so forth. Finally, we have energy pyramids. Pyramids and energy pyramids are just a diagram that shows moving energy as it passes through the ecosystem's food chain. So an example here is grass going into prairie dogs, and then prairie dogs feed the coyotes. You notice there's many fewer coyotes than there are prairie dogs, and there's less prairie dogs than there is grass. And this is because as energy gets passed up the food chain, it decreases, right? There's not going to be the same amount of energy in the coyotes as there is in the grass.